Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Raven's Readings. I will be reading to you from Carry On Jeeves, a collection of short stories written by P.G. Wodehouse in 1925. They are about Jeeves, a valet, and his employer Bertie Wooster, told from the point of view of Bertie. These characters are in dozens of short stories by Wodehouse. I do readings twice a week. If you subscribe to my Substack newsletter, you'll get notified of my updates as soon as they're ready. If you enjoy this reading or have other classics you'd like to hear, leave me a comment. Last episode, Bertie helped a friend regain financial support from an uncle. Next, his friend Rocky shows up with a financial offer from a rich aunt that is not wanted. Jeeves will help with a plan, or an attempted one. Chapter 5, The Ant and the Sluggard. Now that it's all over, I may as well admit that there was a time, during the affair of Rock Metteller Todd, when I thought that Jeeves was going to let me down. Silly of me, of course, knowing him as I do, but that's what I thought. It seemed to me that the man had the appearance of being baffled. The Rocky Todd business broke loose early one morning in spring. I was in bed, restoring the physique with my usual 9 hours of the dreamless, when the door flew open and somebody prodded me in the lower ribs and began to shake the bedclothes in an unpleasant manner. And after blinking a bit and generally pulling myself together, I located Rocky, and my first impression was that it must be some horrid dream. Rocky, you see, lived down on Long Island somewhere miles away from New York, and not only that, but he had told me himself more than once he never got up before 12 and seldom earlier than 1. Constitutionally the laziest young devil in America, he had hit on a walk of life which enabled him to go the limit in that direction. He was a poet. At least he wrote poems when he did anything, but most of his time, as far as I could make out, he spent in a sort of trance. He told me once that he could sit on a fence watching a worm and wondering what on earth it was up to for hours at a stretch. He had his scheme of life worked out to a fine point. About once a month he would take 3 days writing a few poems, and the other 329 days of the year he rested. I didn't know there was enough money in poetry to support a chappie, even in the way in which Rocky lived, but it seems that if you stick to exhortations to young men to lead strenuous life and don't shove in any rhymes, American editors fight for the stuff. Rocky showed me one of his things once. It began, Be, the past is dead. Tomorrow is not born. Be today. Be with every nerve, with every fiber, with every drop of your red blood. Be. Well, there were 3 more verses, and the thing was printed opposite the frontispiece of a magazine with a sort of scroll round it, and a picture in the middle of a fairly nude chappie with bulging muscles giving the rising sun the glad eye. Rocky said they gave him $100 for it, and he stayed in bed till 4 in the afternoon for over a month. As regarding the future, he was pretty solid, owing to the fact that he had a moneyed aunt tucked away somewhere in Illinois. It's a curious thing how many of my pals seem to have aunts and uncles who are their main source of supply. There's Bicky, for one, with his uncle the Duke of Chiswick, and Corky, who, well, until things went wrong, looked to Alexander Warple, the bird specialist, for sustenance. And I shall be telling you a story shortly of a dear friend of mine, Oliver Sipperley, who had an aunt in Yorkshire. These things cannot be mere coincidence. They must be meant. What I'm driving at is that Providence seems to look after the chumps of this world, and personally I'm all for it. I suppose the fact is that, having been snootered from infancy upwards by my own aunts, I like to see that it's possible for these relatives to have a better and softer side. However, this is more or less of a sidetrack. Coming back to Rocky, what I was saying was that he had this aunt in Illinois, and as he had been named Rock Metteller after her, which in itself, you might say, entitled him to substantial compensation, and was her only nephew, his positions looked pretty sound. He told me that when he did come into the money, he meant to do no work at all, except perhaps an occasional poem recommending the young man with life opening out before him with all its splendid possibilities to light a pipe and shove his feet up on the mantelpiece. And this was the man who was prodding me in the ribs in the great dawn. "Read this, Bertie," babbled old Rocky. I could just see that he was waving a letter or something equally foul in my face. "Wake up and read this? I can't read before I've had my morning coffee and a cigarette." I groped for the bell. Jeeves came in, looking as fresh as a dewy violet. It's a mystery to me how he does it. "Tea, Jeeves?" "Very good, sir." I found that Rocky was surging round with his beastly letter again. "What is it?" I said. "What on earth's the matter?" "Read it," he said. "I can't. I haven't had my tea yet." "Well, listen then." "Well, who's it from?" "My aunt." At this point, I fell asleep again. I woke to hear him saying, "So what on earth am I to do?" Jeeves flowed in with the tray like some silent stream meandering over its mossy bed, and I saw daylight. "Read it again, Rocky, old top," I said. "I want Jeeves to hear it. Mr. Todd's aunt has written him a rather rummy letter, Jeeves, and we want your advice." "Very good, sir." He stood in the middle of the room, registering devotion to the cause, and Rocky started again. "My dear Rockmetaler, I have been thinking things over for a long time, and I have come to the conclusion that I have been very thoughtless to wait so long before doing what I have made up my mind to do now." "Well, what do you make of that, Jeeves?" "It seems a little obscure at present, sir, but no doubt it becomes clearer at a later point in the communication." "Oh, proceed, old scout," I said, champing my bread and butter. "You know," her letter continued, "how all my life I have longed to visit New York and see for myself the wonderful gay life of which I have read so much. I fear that now it will be impossible for me to fulfill my dream. I am old and worn out, and I seem to have no strength left in me." "Sad, Jeeves, what?" "Extremely, sir." "Sad nothing," said Rocky. "It's sheer laziness. I went to see her last Christmas. She was bursting with health. Her doctor told me himself there was nothing wrong with her whatever. But she will insist that she's a hopeless invalid, so he has to agree with her. She's got a fixed idea that the trip to New York would kill her, so though it's been her ambition all her life to come here, she stays where she is." I smiled, rather like the chappie whose heart was in the Highlands a-chasing of the deer, Jeeves. "The cases are in some respect parallel, sir." "Okay, carry on, Rocky, dear boy." "So I've decided," the letter continued, "that if I cannot enjoy all the marvels of the city myself, I can at least enjoy them through you. I suddenly thought of this yesterday after reading a beautiful poem in the Sunday paper about a young man who had longed all his life for a certain thing and won it at the end, and only to when he was too old to enjoy it. It was very sad, and it touched me." "A thing," interpolated Rocky bitterly, "that I've not been able to do in 10 years. "As you know," it continued, "you will have my money when I am gone, but until now I have never been able to see my way to giving you an allowance. I have now decided to do so, on one condition. I have written to a firm of lawyers in New York, giving them instructions to pay you quite a substantial sum each month. My one condition is that you live in New York and enjoy yourselves as I have always wished to do. I want you to be my representative, to spend this money for me as I should do myself. I want you to plunge into the gay, prismatic life of New York. I want you to be the life and soul of brilliant supper parties. And above all, I want you, indeed I insist on this, to write me letters at least once a week, giving me a full description of all you're doing and all that is going on in the city, so that I enjoy at second hand what my wretched health prevents me enjoying for myself. Remember that I shall expect full details, and that no detail is too trivial to interest. Your affectionate aunt, Isabel Rockmetaler." "What about it?" said Rocky. "What about it?" I said. "Yes, what on earth am I going to do?" It was only then that I really got on to the extremely rummy attitude of the chappie, in view of the fact that a quite unexpected mess of good cash had suddenly descended on him from a blue sky. To my mind, it was an occasion for the beaming smile and the joyous whoop. Yet here the man was, looking and talking as if fate had swung on his solar plexus. It amazed me. "Aren't you bucked?" I said. "Bucked? Well, if I were in your place, I should be frightfully braced. I consider this pretty soft for you." He gave a kind of yelp, stared at me for a moment, and then began to talk of New York in a way that reminded me of Jimmy Mundy, the reformer bloke. Jimmy had just come to New York on a hit-the-trail campaign, and I'd popped in at Madison Square Garden a couple of days before for a half hour or so to hear him. He had certainly told New York some pretty straight things about itself, having apparently taken a dislike to the place, but by Jove, dear old Rocky made him look like a publicity agent for the old metrop. "Pretty soft," he cried, "to have to come and live in New York, to have to leave my little cottage and take a stuffy, smelly, overheated hole of an apartment in this godforsaken, festering Gehenna? To have to mix night after night with a mob who think that life is a sort of St. Vitus's dance and imagine they're having a good time because they're making enough noise for 6 and drinking too much for 10? I loathe New York, Bertie. I wouldn't come near the place if I hadn't got to see editors occasionally. There's a blight on it. It's got moral delirium tremens. It's the limit. The very thought of staying more than a day in it makes me sick. And you call this thing pretty soft for me?" I felt rather like Lot's friends must have done when they dropped in for a quiet chat, and their genial host began to criticize the cities of the plain. I had no idea old Rocky could be so eloquent. "It would kill me to have to live in New York," he went on, "to have to share the air with 6 million people, to have to wear stiff collars and decent clothes all the time, to—" He started. "Good Lord, I suppose I should have to dress for dinner in the evenings. What a ghastly notion." I was shocked, absolutely shocked. "My dear chap," I said reproachfully. "Well, do you dress for dinner every night, Bertie?" "Jeeves," I said coldly, "how many suits of evening clothes have we?" "We have 3 suits of full evening dress, sir. 2 dinner jackets." "3? For practical purposes, 2 only, sir. If you remember, we cannot wear the 3rd. We also have 7 white waistcoats." "And shirts?" 4 dozen, sir." "And white ties?" "The first 2 shallow shelves in the chest of drawers are completely filled up with our white ties, sir." I turned to Rocky. "You see?" The chappie writhed like an electric fan. "I won't do it. I can't do it. I'll be hanged if I'll do it. How on earth can I dress up like that? Do you realize that most days I don't get out of my pajamas until 5 in the afternoon? Then I just put on an old sweater?" I saw Jeeves wince, poor chap. This sort of revelation shocked his finest feelings. "Oh, then what are you going to do about it?" I said. "Oh, that's what I want to know." "You might write and explain to your aunt." "I might, if I wanted her to get round to her lawyers in 2 rapid leaps and cut me out of her will." I saw his point. "What do you suggest, Jeeves?" I said. Jeeves cleared his throat respectfully. "The crux of the matter would appear to be, sir, that Mr. Todd is obliged by the conditions under which the money is delivered in his possession to write Miss Rockmettler long and detailed letters relating to his movements. The only method by which this can be accomplished, if Mr. Todd adheres to his expressed intention of remaining in the country, is for Mr. Todd to induce some second party to gather the actual experiences which Miss Rockmettler wishes reported to her, and to convey these to him in the shape of a careful report, on which it would be possible for him, with the aid of his imagination, to base the suggested correspondence." Having got which off the old diaphragm, Jeeves was silent. Rocky looked at me in a helpless sort of way. He hasn't been brought up on Jeeves as I have, and he isn't on to his curves. "Could he put it a little clearer, Bertie?" he said. "I thought at the start it was going to make sense, but it kind of flickered. What's the idea?" "Oh, my dear old man," I said, "perfectly simple. I knew we could stand on Jeeves. All you got to do is get somebody to go round the town for you and take a few notes, and then you work the notes up into letters. That's it, isn't it, Jeeves? Precisely, sir. The light of hope gleamed in Rocky's eyes. He looked at Jeeves in a startled way, dazed by the man's vast intellect. But who would do it? He said. It would have to be a pretty smart sort of man, a man who would notice things. Jeeves, I said. Let Jeeves do it. But would he? You would do it, wouldn't you, Jeeves? For the first time in our long connection, I observed Jeeves almost smile. The corner of his mouth curved quite a quarter of an inch, and for a moment his eyes ceased to look like a meditative fish's. I should be delighted to oblige, sir. As a matter of fact, I have already visited some of New York's places of interest on my evening out, and it would be most enjoyable to make a practice of the pursuit. Oh, fine, I said. I know exactly what your aunt wants to hear about, Rocky. She wants an earful of cabaret stuff. The place you ought to go first, Jeeves, is Riggelheimer's. It's on 42nd Street. Anybody will show you the way. Jeeves shook his head. Pardon me, sir. People are no longer going to Riggelheimer's. The place at the moment is Frolics on the Roof. You see, I said to Rocky, leave it to Jeeves. He knows. It isn't often that you find an entire group of your fellow humans happy in this world, but our little circle was certainly an example of the fact that it can be done. We're all full of beans. Everything went absolutely right from the start. Jeeves was happy, partly because he loves to exercise his giant brain, and partly because he was having a corking time among the bright lights. I saw him one night at the midnight revels. He was sitting at a table on the edge of the dancing floor, doing himself remarkably well with a fat cigar. His face wore an expression of austere benevolence, and he was making notes in a small book. As for the rest of us, I was feeling pretty good, because I was fond of old Rocky, and glad to be able to do him a good turn. Rocky was perfectly contented because he was still able to sit on fences in his pajamas and watch worms. And as for the aunt, well, she seemed tickled to death. She was getting Broadway at pretty long range, but it seemed to be hitting her just right. I read one of her letters back to Rocky, and it was full of life. But then Rocky's letters, based on Jeeves's notes, were enough to buck anybody up. It was rummy when you came to think of it. There was I, loving the life, while the mere mention of it gave Rocky a tired feeling. Yet here's a letter that I wrote home to a pal of mine in London. Dear Freddie, well, here I am in New York. It's not a bad place. I'm not having a bad time. Everything's not bad. The cabarets aren't bad. Don't know when I shall be back. How's everybody? Cheerio. Yours, Bertie. P.S. Seen old Ted lately? Not that I cared about old Ted, but if I hadn't dragged him in, I couldn't have got the confounded thing onto the second page. Now here's old Rocky on exactly the same subject. Dearest Aunt Isabel, how can I ever thank you enough for giving me the opportunity to live in this astounding city? New York seems more wonderful every day. Fifth Avenue is at its best, of course, just now. The dresses are magnificent. Then wads of stuff about the dresses. I didn't know Jeeves was such an authority. I was out with some of the crowd at the midnight revels the other night. We took in a show first, after a little dinner at the new place on 43rd Street. We were quite a gay party. Georgie Cohen looked in about midnight and got off a good story about Willie Collier, and Fred Stone could only stay a minute, but Douglas Fairbanks did all sorts of stunts and made us roar. Ed Wynn was there, and Lorette Taylor showed up with a party, and the show at the revels is quite good. I am enclosing a program. Last night, a few of us went round to Frolics on the Roof, and so on, yards and yards of it, filled with references to celebrities that I'm sure never showed up. I suppose it's the artistic temperament or something. What I mean is, it's easier for a chappie who's used to writing poems and that sort of tosh to put a bit of punch into a letter than it is for a fellow like me. Anyway, there's no doubt that Rocky's correspondence was hot stuff. I called Jeeves in and congratulated him. Jeeves, you're a wonder. Thank you, sir. How you notice everything at these places beats me. I couldn't tell you a thing about them, except that I've had a good time. It's just an act, sir. Well, Mr. Todd's letters ought to brace Miss Rockmetaler all right, what? Undoubtedly, sir, agreed Jeeves. And by Jove, they did. They certainly did, by George. What I mean to say, I was sitting in the apartment one afternoon, about a month after the thing had started, smoking a cigarette and resting the old bean, when the door opened and the voice of Jeeves burst the silence like a bomb. It wasn't that he spoke loud. He has one of those soft, soothing voices that slide through the atmosphere like the note of a far-off sheep. It was what he said that made me leap like a young gazelle. Miss Rockmetaler. And in came a large, solid female. The situation floored me. I'm not denying it. Hamlet must have felt much as I did when his father's ghost bobbed up in the fairway. I'd come to look at Rocky's aunt as such a permanency at her own home. It didn't seem possible that she could really be here in New York. I stared at her. Then I looked at Jeeves. He was standing there in an attitude of dignified detachment, the chump. When, if ever, he should have been rallying around the young master, it was now. Rocky's aunt looked less like an invalid than anybody I've ever seen, except my Aunt Agatha. She had a good deal of Aunt Agatha about her, in a matter of fact. She looked as if she might be deucedly dangerous if put upon, and if something seemed to tell me she would certainly regard herself as being put upon if she ever found out the game which poor old Rocky had been pulling on her. Good afternoon, I managed to say. How do you do, she said. Mr. Cohen? No. Mr. Fred Stone? Oh, not absolutely. As a matter of fact, my name's Wooster, Bertie Wooster. She seemed disappointed. The fine old name of Wooster appeared to mean nothing to her. Isn't Rockmetaler home? She said. Where is he? She had me with the first shot. I couldn't think of anything to say. I couldn't tell her that Rocky was down in the country watching worms. There was the faintest flutter of sound in the background. It was the respectful cough with which Jeeves announces that he's about to speak without having been spoken to. If you remember, sir, Mr. Todd went out in the automobile with a party earlier in the afternoon. Oh, so he did, Jeeves, so he did, I said, looking at my watch. Did he say when he would be back? He gave me to understand, sir, that he would be somewhat late in returning. He vanished, and the aunt took the chair which I'd forgotten to offer her. She looked at me in rather a rummy way. It was a nasty look. It made me feel as if I were something the dog had brought in and intended to bury later on when he had time. My own Aunt Agatha back in England had looked at me exactly the same way many a time and never fails to make my spine curl. You seem very much at home here, young man. Are you a great friend of Rockmetaler's? Oh, yes, rather. She frowned as if she had expected better things of old Rocky. Well, you need to be, she said. The way you treat his flat as your own. I give you my word. This quite unforeseen slam simply robbed me of the power of speech. I've been looking at myself in the light of the dashing host, and suddenly to be treated as an intruder jarred me. It wasn't, mark you, as if she had spoken in a way to suggest that she considered my presence in the place as an ordinary social call. She obviously looked on me as a cross between a burglar and the plumber's man come to fix the leak in the bathroom. It hurt her, my being there. At this juncture, with a conversation showing every sign of being about to die in awful agonies, an idea came to me. Tea, the good old standby. Would you care for a cup of tea, I said. Tea? She spoke as if she'd never heard of the stuff. Oh, nothing like a cup after a journey, I said. Bucks you up, puts a bit of zip into you. What I mean is restores you and so on, don't you know? I'll go and tell Jeeves. I tottered down the passage to Jeeves's lair. The man was reading the evening paper as if he hadn't a care in the world. Jeeves, I said, we want some tea. Very good, sir. I say, Jeeves, this is a bit thick, what? I wanted sympathy, don't you know, sympathy and kindness, and the old nerve centers had had the deuce of a shock. She's got the idea, I said, that this place belongs to Mr. Todd. What on earth put that into her head? Jeeves filled the kettle with a restrained dignity. No doubt because of Mr. Todd's letters, sir, he said. It was my suggestion, sir, if you remember, that they should be addressed from this apartment in order that Mr. Todd should appear to possess a good central residence in the city. I remembered. We thought it a brainy scheme at the time. Well, it's dashed awkward, you know, Jeeves. She looks on me as an intruder. By Jove, I suppose she thinks I'm someone who hangs about here, touching Mr. Todd for free meals and borrowing his shirts. Extremely probable, sir. It's pretty rotten, you know. Most disturbing, sir. And another thing, what are we to do about Mr. Todd? We've got to get him up here as soon as ever we can. When you brought the tea, you better go out and send him a telegram telling him to come up by the next train. I have already done so, sir. I took the liberty of writing the message and dispatching it by the lift attendant. Oh, by Jove, you think of everything, Jeeves. Thank you, sir. A little buttered toast with the tea? Just so, sir. Thank you. I went back to the dining room. She hadn't moved an inch. She was still bolt upright on the edge of her chair, gripping her umbrella like a hammer thrower. She gave me another of those looks as I came in. There was no doubt about it. For some reason, she had taken a dislike to me. I suppose because I wasn't George M. Cohen. It was a bit hard on a chap. This is a surprise, what? I said, after about 5 minutes of restless silence, trying to crank the conversation up again. What is a surprise? Well, you're coming here, don't you know, and so on. She raised her eyebrows and drank me in a bit more through her glasses. Why is it surprising that I should visit my only nephew, she said. Oh, rather, I said. Of course, certainly. What I mean is... Jeeves projected himself into the room with the tea. I was jolly glad to see him. There's nothing like having a bit of business arranged for one when one isn't certain of one's lines. With the teapot to fool around about, I felt happier. Tea? What? I said. It wasn't what I meant to say. My idea had been to be a good deal more formal and so on. Still, it covered the situation. I poured her out a cup. She sipped it and put the tea down with a shudder. Do you mean to say, young man, she said frostily, that you expect me to drink this stuff? Rather. Bucks you up, you know. What do you mean by the expression bucks you up? Well, makes you full of beans, you know. Makes you fizz. I don't understand a word you say. You're English, aren't you? I admitted it. She didn't say a word. And she did it in a way that made it worse than if she'd spoken for hours. Somehow it brought home to me that she didn't like Englishmen, and if she ever had to meet an Englishman, I was the one she'd have chosen last. The conversation languished once more after that. Then I tried again. I was becoming more convinced every moment that you can't make a really lively salon with just a couple of people, especially if one of them lets it go just a word at a time. Are you comfortable at your hotel? I said. At which hotel? The hotel you're staying at. I'm not staying at a hotel. Stopping with friends, what? I'm naturally stopping with my nephew. I didn't get it for the moment, then it hit me. What? Here? I gurgled. Where else should I go? End of episode. Well, good question. It appears Bertie is stuck with her. Will he have to leave? What about Rocky? What a mess. Stay tuned for the next episode. If you subscribe to my newsletter, you'll get notified of my updates as soon as they're ready. If you enjoy this reading or have other classics you'd like to hear, leave me a comment. Check out my other posts on my Substack at ravensview.substack.com. And remember to share this with your friends. Ta-ta for now.